Welcome to Massive Passive Cash Flow, the podcast that guides professionals to financial prosperity. Join our community and let's start building your wealth. Here's your host, Gary Wilson.
Hello and welcome to Real Estate Investing for Professional Men and Women. This is the podcast for you. Typically, you're professional in your field, often business owner, chiropractor, dentist, engineer, pilot. Fireman, policeman. We've had them all. Okay. On the podcast, if you haven't subscribed yet, please feel free to do so. It's now on 30 some odd channels: iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, all the usual suspects, and listeners in over 40, almost 50 countries. So, and if you want to be part of this community, it's easy to do. Just go to realestatewithgarywilson.com. Click on the members area. If you're already a member, you go on the left-hand side. If you're not, you go to the right-hand side. Check it out for free for 30 days. You get access to cash buyers reports, private lenders, the community site, all the marketing, 260 recordings on everything from Airbnb to assisted living. There's one thing we don't have a lot of out there, which is called lease options. And the good news is today we've got a wonderful guest named Wendy Patton. Wendy got him, sorry, I believe that's you there. And she's going to talk to us about lease options. I've met her before. She and I are both brokers in the largest brokerage company in the world called Keller Williams. And we both are real estate investors. So Wendy, welcome aboard. I appreciate you being here to share your wisdom and knowledge with everybody.
Thank you, Gary. I'm really glad to be here today.
Good. So. Hey, if you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of a picture here. I know you've got a really great story to tell, but maybe tell everybody a little bit who you are, and then we get into some content it'll resonate more with people. I believe we could do it that way. Is that okay?
You bet. So you want a little bit about my background then initially?
Yeah. Okay. Give us the juicy details. We want the good stuff.
Okay. Well, I started in 1985 investing in real estate. I graduated from the University of Colorado, came to Michigan and for a position. And then before I left, my mother gave me a real estate course and said, "Hey, Wendy, your dad won't let me invest in real estate. Will you take this course with you and do something with it?" So on the way to Michigan is when I really dug into that course, Gary, and I realized I don't really want to have a job. I want to do this investing thing. Yeah. Sure, my parents probably weren't real thrilled about that after just paying for my degree, but it worked out and it changed my life. That course changed my life. So when I got to Michigan, there was a shortage of housing, and to make a long story short, I ended up buying my first property because I didn't have any money or any credit. I mean, I had credit, but I didn't have any money. I had a credit card, and that was how I bought my first house. My down payment came from that. I bought my first house, and I did the house hacking thing, right? They call it now, but it's been around forever. And rented my 2 bedrooms to 2 ladies that had moved into the area as well, and it paid for my entire mortgage payment and my credit card payment. So I was living free. That's kind of how it started. After that, I started doing a lot of other creative financing strategies. Primarily, my specialty was, lease options. I started realizing that I could option properties without using any money or any credit of mine. I control lots of really, I called them pretty houses, right? They were houses that I really couldn't afford without having something creative to purchase them on. Yeah. And they were nicer than the house I bought for myself to live in. So I started buying properties using lease options and then started selling them using lease options, which is called a sandwich lease option, right? You option it from the owner, you sublet it to a tenant buyer, you keep the spread in the middle. The difference between what I pay for rent, what I rent it for, what I pay for the purchase price, what I sold it for. And then, of course, an option fee up front. I usually don't give my sellers anything up front or very, very, very little down. And then my tenant buyers typically will give me 3 to 5% down of the purchase price. So $200,000 home, they're giving me 6 to 10 grand down. So I had the money up front, cash flow every month, and the back end spread. So that's kind of how I got started with the lease option deals. And then since then, I've added I call cooperative options, which is more of wholesaling options. We get these lease options, sellers willing to do a lease option. It's not worth it for me to hang on there as a sandwich lease option. So I get the deal from the seller and I just flip it to an end buyer for the option fee, and that's all I get paid. Kind of like a commission. Really, I get 3 to 5%, and that's what I get paid, but I'm done on the deal. So those are kind of the two different lease option deals I do.
Well, I like the approach, and I've actually purchased a property through lease option and sold. Actually, I had one property I've sold, I think, 3 times.
Yeah. Sometimes you get them back.
Yeah, but it's really neat. The thing I like about the strategy is you can always find an application for it. Doesn't matter if the economy is going up or down or sideways, whatever. There's always an application for that technique. And like right now, inventory has been getting tighter and tighter. Interest rates are extremely low, which means prices go higher. So if you think about it, what a great way for someone to lock in a person or a couple wanting to get their first home, lock into that current price. And then later on, when they conventionally get their financing, they've got that price that they locked in early on. And then someone gets to sell, everybody wins. But if you wouldn't mind, by the way, one quick note here. You and I are so much alike. I graduated from college, Wendy.
Yeah.
20 days, I bought my first house. I bought it with my college roommate, Socrates. And this was January 1986. We assumed his first mortgage, which was a VA mortgage. You can still do that today. We refinanced the second because he had a second mortgage. And then for the remainder of the equity, we gave him a third mortgage. We gave him a note, excuse me.
Wow, yeah.
And almost had no money into it. Same thing. We had 4 bedrooms. We rented out the other 2 bedrooms to 2 other guys. Their rents combined paid most of our costs.
Right, so you live cheap.
Yeah, like, wow, this is great. I was just young enough to not have any fear. Like, I just thought, well, what the heck? Sock's dad's doing it. I might as well, this works. I might as well do it too. And going forward, I then took the Carlton sheet stuff and all that. But if you don't mind, I want to kind of turn things back over to you. Can you give us an example? I know there's multiple ways to do lease options, but let's just take one. Like, say, for example, we've got a dentist that's been in practice for 4 years. They just bought a second practice, so they're stretched out financially, and maybe not the best time for them to get take on any other debt or something like that. But could you give us maybe like a case study or example? Maybe you've got one similar to that if you've done in the past. What that would look like, because we have a lot of listeners kind of in that category, So,
yeah. You mean so it sounds like maybe a commercial perspective there?
Well, maybe from 2 perspectives. For example, they want to buy an investment property, like a duplex or a single-family home they can rent out. So maybe we can approach it from the buyer side and then also the seller side with some detail, because some people have heard lease option, they just don't know what it actually is,
Yeah. So technically, okay. So just to get the kind of just a definition first of all, right? A lease option is when you lease the property with the right to purchase it within a given time period, and the price is usually set, or there has to be a way to determine the price. In other words, it's going to be this much plus whatever a certain index is, but it has to be very clearly defined. That's what makes a legal lease with an option to buy. So typically, I'm looking for a seller who's willing to do this. So you're right, inventory is tight right now. Why would sellers want to do this? Well, they still do. Just like in any market, you have less sellers willing to do it now because the market is hot, but you always have sellers that are willing to do it. And so the type of sellers that I typically am looking for are usually, not always, this is just kind of high level to give you the best ones to find, are sellers that have already, they have another home. So they've already moved out of their home. They built a new home. Their old one hasn't sold yet. They've gotten married and married someone else who had a home. They move into one of the homes. They have the other one available. They've inherited a home and they have their own home. They've gotten some, not usually a divorce, but sometimes they need cashed out. That can happen. It can happen. But typically it's something where a burned out landlord is one of my favorites. They're just, I'm done being a landlord. I like the cash flow, but I hate the management. I'm done with tenants. So those are all opportunities where someone doesn't need to sell in order to buy. And that is the key right there. If they're living in the home still and they have to sell that home to buy the next one, that is not usually a lease option situation where a seller would do it. So it's usually they either don't need the cash out or they have already moved and they've already bought their new home. Okay. Yeah. Typically those are. So one of the other things that we talked about a little bit before the call started, was working with real estate agents. And real estate, it's one reason I got my real estate license, right?
Yeah.
Is I wanted to control my own deals and get part of the commission on those deals and have access to the data. I don't want to wait for someone else. When I started, like you, Gary, I started I think my first house was 1986 also, or late 85, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And I bought my first home, and then I bought a couple rentals right away too. And I realized I had to wait for someone to show them to me and on their schedule. And it just drove me kind of crazy. I was like, no, I want to see them, now. And I knew they were vacant. Well, now with the license, right, I can go in anytime. So anyways, working with real estate agents is key, because a lot of what I look for with agents are deals, properties that have been sitting on the market at least 90 or 120 days.
Okay.
So I will call real estate agents and just say, let me say, as an example, like say it's yours, Gary. I'd say, hey, Gary, this is Wendy Patton with Keller Williams Realty. I was calling about your property on 123 XYZ Street. Is it still available? And you say, yes, right? And then I say, well, great. I noticed it's been listed for a while. And then I shut up and I count. I literally do this because I talk a lot, you can tell. I'm like, and sometimes you'll say, yeah, or sometimes you'll say, and people hate silence, right? So then sometimes the agent will start diarrhea of the mouth. And they start telling me, well, that's because the brother died and the sister's not sure what to do. And, it slowed it down and blah, 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 or whatever. Or that's because the buyer's financing fell through and, or the inspection issue or whatever. All of a sudden I find out information that maybe I really not supposed to just know, but I do know. Yeah. And that helps me to make a better decision on whether this is an investment deal or not. Sometimes I'll also just say, okay, yeah. Then I just say, well, is there any chance? I want you guys, if you're listening or watching, write this down, okay? Mm-hmm. I say, is there any chance your seller might consider something like a lease with an option to buy, a lease to own, a rent to own, a lease option, a land contract in my states, we call land contract for deed if you're somewhere else, wherever you're listening from, seller financing, something like that. So I just put every term I could think of that's considered seller financing, besides subject to's, because that doesn't work with real estate agents real well. But I try to throw everything out that I think they might know. And then I just shut up again. And for the most part, most of them will say, I don't know, or maybe. I've had some of them say, well, they won't do a lease with an option to buy, but they'll do a rent to own. And I said, okay, well, we'll do a rent to own then. I mean, same thing, okay? Right. But most agents, but see, that rent to own term was the one they understood, so that's why I throw out all the terms to see what might resonate with them, if any of them. Yeah. And sometimes I might say, no, they absolutely won't. They need their cash. Okay, next. That's a really great way to find them too, through real estate agents. Yeah. Okay. So those are some of the ways to find the seller. We talked about the buyer. Do you want to talk about the buyer too, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So on the buyer end, I'm looking for someone as a buyer who has the opportunity to truly buy. In other words, I'm looking for someone who might have had a blip. Usually they have a blip in their credit. They might have had a divorce. They might have had a bankruptcy. They might have had a foreclosure, a short sale, something that caused a blip in their life that they have fixed. Okay, it has to be something that's kind of like a whoop, and then they're on their way back up again. So not someone who's like, and they're still there, right? Yeah. It has to be something that they have fixed. And that's typically why they can't get a mortgage right away, but they might need another 12, 18, 24 months. That's the most I'll go is 24 months. Yeah. To, be able to qualify for a mortgage because of that credit blip. Maybe they don't have enough down. Yeah. Usually they don't have enough down, though they probably don't have enough down for even my option fee, which is typically 5%. So that's kind of what I'm looking for from a tenant buyer, is someone who has that kind of a little glitch in their life. Like a lot of people have, right? We've all had times in our lives where if you've been in this business long enough, probably been affected as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I tell you what, I appreciate you sharing that, because you were making me think of some of my own experiences. One of my uncles down outside of Houston, Texas, a little place called Magnolia. He's been an investor his whole life. He's now in his early 80s, and he started this in his 70s. He said, I've got all this inventory that's paid off. He said, I don't want to sell them outright. What he started doing was selling to people, Wendy, that would put down 10% but they also needed help building their credit up. And that's what he'd do. And eventually they would go ahead and refinance 3-5 years later. But he says, Gary, I've got these annuities. They're paying me every month. I'm 80 years old. Yeah. I don't need millions of dollars right now. I just need the cash flow. And then check this out. You might like this idea too. We look at data, so we can look at property ownership records on our county's property files, right?
Yeah. So
one of my students out in Santa Barbara, California.
Yeah.
She did the research, and she's another KW agent too. She realized there was a large percentage of properties that were owned 40 to 60 years by the same people, and those people were now in their 60s to 80s, and they were being hammered by the flippers. And she's like, look, why don't you let us help you? I'm an agent. I've got a contractor. We'll help you so that you can participate in this additional profit, right? In that age group, you would think, well, maybe they don't want to have mortgages strung out for 30 years because they're 80 years old. But that's not the point. The point is the people will refinance in 3 to 5 years, right? 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. So I think this was an awesome opportunity for a lot of baby boomers out there who want that annuity type income coming in. I mean, what you do serves a credible niche. I mean, it's valuable, and that it's going to be growing. I mean, I'm tail end of the baby boom generation from what I'm told. I don't feel like it, but that's what I'm being told. So,
well, what you're saying too is like with these people that have owned their properties for a long time, like your uncle. Well, the biggest issue is, okay, now he wants to liquidate. Well, you can't just dump them on the market at once. You're going to get clobbered by capital gains, right? All in 1 year, even though they're long-term gains, he's got to recapture all that depreciation. And you don't want all of that in 1 year, right? Because that's a big chunk, or could be. And he, at his age, you may not want to 1031 exchange him into other properties. So it does give, I've bought some before from landlords that have given me package deals, but it has been set up where the option is so flexible and can be so complex and so simple in one deal. But where they will say, hey, Wendy, I only will allow you to close on 1 a year. So I'm going to sell you these 5 or 10 properties, but you can only exercise the option 1 per year, because that way they only have gains 1 at a time. But during those other years, they still have the cash flow and all these properties, but they don't have to manage them. They don't have to deal with repair. A lot of times I'll take the repairs off of them. So I'll take care of all the repairs. Now they're going to get less rent, of course, because otherwise they'd have to get top rent, but they would have to pay for the repairs. So I could take care of the repairs and take that burden off of them and keep it simple for them. But their rent guarantee is going to be less per month, but they still get that cash flow. And that's one thing that they really love, being a landlord, but they hate the landlording, the management.
Yeah. If for everybody listening, one of the beautiful things about when you're selling a property through lease option is you're really, the mindset is the buyer, the optionee feels a sense of ownership. So they automatically paint and cut the grass and do all this stuff. It's like, and you can even make it so tight that they even take care of furnaces and roofs and things like that. I mean, it's an incredible opportunity to have the cash flow without all the headaches. Believe I've got all these gray hairs. They're all tenant stories over all those years, hundreds of units. And oh my gosh. Hey,
usually in the tenant buyer, I'll typically, like you said, it does make it easier as a landlord. You can't require a tenant buyer to do repairs at all. It would be illegal. However, and that's in the rental agreement, right? In my option agreement, which is separate from the landlord-tenant type of stuff, is that if I have to do any repairs at all, it gets added to the purchase price plus an interest rate, okay, whatever is legal at the time. There's a formula. And so what I'll say is, and I'll do a kind of a deal. Sometimes I'll do with the seller. I'll say, this like the sandwich lease option. Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I don't want to nickel and dime you for everything, okay? So anything that's above $500 in repairs, I want you to pay. Anything below that, I'll just take care of it. Okay, that's one way to do it. And then tenant buyer, you know what? I don't want to kill you with anything that's really big, but you're going to be a homeowner, so you got to start learning how to take care of these things. So anything under 500, you take care of. Anything over 500, I'll take care of. The thing is, I'm not taking care of either one, right? He's taking care of the first, and they're taking care of this, of the second 500 or above, and then they're below. And that's one way to do it. The other way is to, of course, just make sure that the tenant buyer pays all repairs if they want that option fee to be valid, or if they don't want it added to the purchase price later. So there are ways to account for that, but you do have to be a little bit careful how you do it. And it, depending on where you live, of course, California is like a different country. So East Coast, West Coast are going to be a lot more pro-tenant, and you're going to want to kind of be cautious on how you word that in your option agreement.
Yeah. California, New Jersey, New York. Actually, you know what? Let's talk about that if you don't mind. So I know you're in Michigan, and of course I've been in Pennsylvania for a quarter century. Actually, believe it or not, I actually live in Florida now. I'm hardly ever here, but I'm here today. And you'll love this. My wife's Canadian, so we live just over the border in London, Ontario. I mean, I'm literally just a couple hours from you. So I'll be up there. She's coming down this next weekend. But in any case, let's talk about geography, like not Canada per se. I mean, we do this in Canada too, by the way.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. I have a lot of students in Canada. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, they're hard workers, man. They're good. So, but
very similar in Canada and the UK and Australia.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about that geography. So maybe from both sides again. So Texas is obviously going to be easier than California. But what you do and what you teach, I mean, and I want you to talk about that too, is what you offer to people to help them do what you're doing. Let's say they were in California. What do they know there? Or maybe should they maybe invest in Texas or Michigan, even though they live in California? So if you might spend a little bit of time on that, like geography and how that changes the approach.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so every state kind of has their own little nuances, or could have their own nuances. California, for instance, I have a special California clause that should be put into an option agreement that a California real estate attorney. And Texas actually is not that easy. Texas is got its own issues. It is very difficult to sell on an option in Texas.
Okay.
It requires they have certain rules and things. It's very easy to buy. So if you're going to buy, no problem. But to sell in Texas would be more difficult. Okay, you can lease option from an owner, and then you can sublease and verbally say, I'll be willing to sell to you at some point. But it's more difficult. Okay, there are some ways around it. Some guys that do it in Texas, but there are some nuances to that.
Okay.
And then like for instance, in Columbus, Ohio, in that city only, Cincinnati, there are some maximum option fees you can charge. Okay. So those are some of the ones right off the top of my head that I can tell you. But if you're in California or you're in Hawaii, or anywhere that's higher and more expensive real estate, New York, it would be actually an awesome opportunity, especially the cooperative options, flipping those, because you're talking 3 to 5% of the purchase price, right? So $1 million home, you're going to make 30, 50 grand. Boom. Done. Okay. You don't even have to own it. You don't have to sublet it. You don't have to be,
right.
Get the purchase, get the option agreement, and then you assign it, just like any wholesale deal. It's just that when you're wholesaling an option, you're wholesaling it to an end tenant buyer, not another investor like typical wholesaling is. Okay.
Yeah.
But you can do it from anywhere too. If you're in if you're in California, you can buy in Michigan. A lot of my students, I have one guy who lives in India who buys in Chicago only.
Wow.
And he does cooperative options. He flips them, and he has a guy on the ground that does a lot of the showings for him when he needs to get someone in there, but he does it all through the internet and gets all the signatures done, all online e-signatures, and has for years. So he does quite well with that.
Nice.
I don't know if that's what you're asking, Gary, or
yeah.
But there's always ways to do it. Now, sandwich lease options, I think, in my opinion, is I like them nearby because they do require more management, unless you have a good management team in the area that you want to have a sandwich lease option going. Because you got to be, ready to handle any maintenance if they do come up. You got to be ready to handle any releasing or, unfortunately, eviction if you need to. Mm-hmm. You're still in it. So that's a big difference with those two, in my opinion. I think being the cooperative, you can do them you can live anywhere in the world and do them.
Okay. You mentioned evictions too. One thing, if this is still true, in the old days, we started getting away from rent to own because we found out if somebody wasn't paying their rent and a portion of that was going toward the purchase of the property, and it goes to court, the magistrate would say, well, they have equitable title because they've already got equity in the property. Whereas a lease option, the lease is not ownership. The lease is the option. I'm sorry, the option is not ownership. The option is the right to purchase. a layered 8, and every dollar of the rent on a lease will go towards rent. And so it's easier to evict.
Yeah, I think those two words, and rent to own and lease with an option, are the same thing. It depends on what your option or lease says. So you are right that I do not give my tenant buyers any credit. I don't care what you call it, lease option, rent to own, doesn't matter. That rental payment is for rent only. Yeah. This actually changed after the Dodd-Frank rulings changed because of the little interest, and also in certain states like California is going to be a lot more pro-tenant. They might have done it even before Dodd-Frank, right? So you do have to be cautious. Years ago, I would always say I give my tenant buyers $100 of credit toward the purchase price if they pay the rent on time every month. If they don't, they lose it. Now I don't do that at all. It's 100% rent versus not. I mean, there's just no credits. The only thing that gets credited in my deals are that upfront 3 to 5%. Yeah, I do give that credit. I do give them that credit, and I've never had a judge in my area not allow that, and I've never heard of any of my students either around the country have an issue with that. But those option credits each month can be a little bit tricky because they're building up equitable interest, and I say it's like a mortgage. You can call it what you want to be. It looks and talks and quacks like seller financing, which means foreclosure, not eviction.
Right.
Well, once they get that equitable interest.
Yeah, evictions generally are much easier than foreclosures.
In most states, really every state, they really are. But
you know what? Let's talk about this. We're kind of getting closer, but one more thing is we're interesting times right now. So the market has been peaking out, and now, of course, it's starting to go all over the place because of the threat of the coronavirus. And this is also going to timestamp this podcast, of course, but very timely. So 10 years ago we were at the bottom of a recession. Now we're at the top. So have you noticed any difference in how you apply the strategies in the bottom of the market versus the top, or is it the same? I mean, different category, different groups of people, different needs, but to me it's always applicable. But what have you seen there in your experience? Any examples you can bring up or difference on strategy depending on where we are in the market?
Right. I think the biggest thing is whether a buyer's market, seller's market. It really doesn't matter. There's deals out there always, but in a strong seller's market like we have now in most parts of the country, you're going to have to be more cautious to make sure that you structure your deal properly. And we just talked about not giving tenant buyers option credits, but it's the opposite when I'm buying, right? Because I'm not worried about Dodd-Frank. I'm an investor to as an owner, right? It's totally different. Those you can get, and I will try to get as much as I can. So I'm looking for sellers that have equity in their property for me to do a sandwich lease option. Because even if, say, I buy it for $200 and it's at the top of the market, if I'm getting option credits from my rent every month, sometimes 100%. It could be my rent is $1,000 a month and all $1,000 gets applied. So then I owe $199, $198, $197. I'm going to try to get as much of that credit as I can so I can kind of acquire some equity, let's just say, or take some of the equity that the seller has. That's going to be my part for managing it and controlling it during those couple of years.
Right.
And I'm going to be looking more for that type of thing in a strong market. Well, even in a weak market, because a weak market, they might be more willing to give all of it, right? It's just, you're going to be able to negotiate a lot stronger with the seller in a weak market than a strong market.
Yeah.
The beauty of it is, in a strong market, this is, I think, one of the techniques that should be used right now. Because if we're at the top of the market, which I think we are, we may not be the very, very top, but we're somewhere close, right? And let's say the market does tank.
Yeah.
And I've got an option with the seller.
Right.
I don't have to exercise it. I've got the option to walk away. I don't have any obligation. Seller has obligation to me, but I don't have an obligation to them. So it's a kind of a really powerful strategy to use in that example, right? You don't have to exercise. I have the right, the privilege, the freedom, the ability to exercise, but not the obligation. Yeah. So I think it's a great thing in the top of the market.
Yeah, the thing I like best about it is that it really allows a lot of people to participate in owning and or selling real estate, particularly the buyers that might not otherwise be able to. They can jump in and if you're the person facilitating, making all this happen, you really have little liability. You're providing a valuable service. Everybody wins. I mean, it's just, to me, it's it's always fascinating, but I've always been more of a buy and hold kind of person. I've done a lot of flips too, but the lease options, I've been on both ends of them, and I always thought I should probably do more of this, but and so here I meet you, and you're like, you've built a history around this and are serving a lot of people. In fact, would you mind sharing that, is there a website people can go to? How can they get a hold of you? A free report, a free books, anything to let them kind of tip their toes in the water, and perhaps they might want to go further with it too. If you don't mind sharing, that would be awesome.
Yeah, no problem. My website's wendypatton.com, and on that website I have a blog. I have a lot of free information. I also have books I've written on lease options and subject twos, any kind of creative financing. I've got a lot of stuff on there for that. And of course, lease option courses, some of the things we're talking about, buying an option, selling an options, cooperative options, and working with real estate agents. They're all those courses and subject twos are on my website for you to find out more about. And it's got my phone number and email contact that you can use right from that website.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Also, if you don't mind me mentioning, I know you also are a broker like me, and you've got a whole office full of agents there. If anybody's interested in investing in Michigan, you're a little bit west of Detroit, but it's right smack in the middle of the state. My gosh, I'd say, guys, reach out to Wendy. She'll team up with some of her guys, and a lot of us do invest in Michigan. It's one of the best areas to invest in.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So, Wendy, any other words of wisdom, final thoughts? Like, you and I have been at this. We're almost like twins, because we've been doing it the same amount of time, starting the same time. Almost identical stories. This is crazy, but any words of wisdom, like even like an emotional mindset kind of thing that you think would maybe help somebody take that first step?
Gosh, I always say, I love that Nike thing. Just do it, And I think that's what got me started. Is I just did it. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have to know all the answers and every little detail to how to get involved. I just knew that I was going to get involved, and I started taking action. And that's the big key, right? Consistent, persistent action daily.
That's it.
And people will say now to me, like, oh gosh, Wendy, look how successful you are. Look what you've done. And I'm like, no. I started 35 years ago doing stuff every day, right?
Yeah.
And making those decisions that I wanted my life to be something different. And I really loved this business of investing, and I wanted to be successful. So now I have lots of different aspects, right? A title company. I own the Keller Williams office here. I run the Michigan Real Estate Investors Group. By the way, if you want to be an investor or you're in Michigan, come to the Michigan Real Estate Investors Group. That's my group. I'm there every month and would love to help you out too.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. I know I learned this over the years too, is people up at the top are willing to help you, but you got to reach up and ask for help. And if you want to be at that level, you got to think at that level first. Yeah. Then you got to take action to get to that level. So it's the action thing. In fact, if I could create a magic pill for taking action, I'd be a gajillionaire. But that's probably the key thing. So I appreciate you sharing that, and it's fun to do this. And this has been one of my favorite podcasts too, by the way. And so everybody listening, I think we owe Wendy a round of applause, and I thank you for sharing your valuable time, Wendy. And everybody, please make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. Go to wendypatton.com website. Go to Real Estate with Gary Wilson. Two different approaches, same pathway, and participate. Just join up and hang out with us. Hang with people who are at where you want to be. Okay. And for everybody, and you too, Wendy, God bless you and your families, and we will see you on the next podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Massive Passive Cash Flow. Be sure to go to realestatewithgarywilson.com to join our community and start building wealth today.